Hello again. One of the great advantages of being old, and there are of course advantages and disadvantages to being in that state, is that one is not nearly so apt to see this or that development as being revolutionary or wholly novel. Ecclesiastes wrote long ago that there is nothing new under the sun, and so it still proves. When Scotland's Hate Crime and Public Order Act became law, most appositely on April Fool's Day this year, there were all kinds of wild claims made about it. It was, for example, suggested that the idea of stirring up hatred was a dangerous and new one, likely to lead to all kinds of mischief. Indeed, some people referred to it as a stirring up act, as though this stirring up hatred thing had something dreamed up by Khamsi Youssef. There is not a word of truth in such extravagant claims. In the description to this video, I give a link to the text of the 1965 Race Relations Act, which was introduced by Harold Wilson's government a year after they came to power. This act altered the 1936 Public Order Act, the one brought in to combat Mosley's black shirt movement, of course, and it introduced the following provisions. A person shall be guilty of an offence under this section if, with intent to stir up hatred against any section of the public, in Great Britain distinguished by colour, race, ethnic or national origins, he publishes or distributes written matter which is threatening, abusive or insulting, or if he uses in any public place or at any public meeting words which are threatening, abusive or insulting. You see, it had long been an offence at common law to stir up mutiny or incite insurrection or encourage violence. But this was the first time that stirring up hatred was made against the law, which is quite a curious idea. You can readily understand why it would be against the law for me to go out into public and urge people to burn down a police station, say, or to attack some minority. Urging violence is obviously a bad thing. But stirring up hatred is another matter entirely. This is very vague. You can see why new legislation had to be brought in to cater for this idea. All the talk today about hate crimes and hate speech stem ultimately from this act. The act also made it an offence to discriminate on the grounds of race, colour or nationality when renting out property. Older readers might remember that at that time it was not uncommon to see signs saying "Room to let, sorry no coloureds." I might go off at a slight tangent for a moment. In recent years an effort has been made to claim that signs were put up forbidding Irish blacks or dogs, but this is not true at all. It's a complete fantasy. It's a fantasy dreamed up at an Irish centre in London during the 1980s by some people who wished to claim that they too had been victims of racial prejudice. You will sometimes see a sign with this message on it used to illustrate the point. It's shown against a lace net curtain and it says "No Irish, no blacks, no dogs." It's often used to illustrate the point of how awful discrimination was when it came to renting out property. That particular sign was mocked up, scribbled in marker pen in 1986, and it was produced at that same centre. You will note this is the only evidence ever produced for the claim. There was considerable opposition to the Race Relations Act when it came into law, because it was said that a British person had a perfect right to choose who he wished to rent a room or house to. The idea was that this act infringed upon the liberty of the majority to dispose of their property and arrange for it as seemed best to them. In the same way, the idea that people should be able to be sent to prison for stirring up hatred was also very controversial and was seen as an attack on the sacred principle of free speech. Enoch Powell made this point in his famous speech in 1968. Speaking specifically of the Race Relations Act, he said, "This does not mean that the immigrant and his descendants should be elevated into a privileged or special class, or that the citizen should be denied his right to discriminate in the management of his own affairs between one fellow citizen and another, or that he should be subjected to imposition as to his reasons and motive for behaving in one lawful manner rather than another. There could be no grosser misconception of the realities than is entertained by those who vociferously demand legislation, as they call it, against discrimination, whether they be leader writers of the same kidney and sometimes on the same newspapers, which, year after year in the 1930s, tried to blind this country to the rising peril which confronted it, or archbishops who live in palaces, faring delicately with the bedclothes pulled right up over their heads. They have got it exactly and diametrically wrong. The discrimination and the deprivation, the sense of alarm and of resentment, lies not with the immigrant population, but with those among whom they have come and are still coming." This is why to enact legislation of the kind before Parliament at the moment is to risk throwing a match onto gunpowder. The kindest thing that can be said about those who propose and support it is that they know not what they do. This is quite curious to hear. A lot of this could have been said about Scotland's new law. It's very up to date. As a matter of fact, the very crux of what is sometimes called the Rivers of Blood speech concerns the Race Relations Act, because a new one was being put together at that time. Powell said that using the expression with which his speech will be forever associated, here is the means of showing that the immigrant communities can organise to consolidate their members, to agitate and campaign against their fellow citizens, and to overawe and dominate the rest with the legal weapons which the ignorant and ill-informed have provided. As I look ahead, I am filled with foreboding. Like the Roman, I seem to see the river Tiber foaming with much blood. By which it will be seen that this first introduction into law of the idea of stirring up hatred had great repercussions, which we are still seeing today.